The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to start with something a little different today. We have been talking for a while about the idea of universal basic income. And whenever we talk about universal basic income, invariably, we also hear about some tech billionaire that likes the idea of universal basic income. And we wonder, anytime that we hear about someone who is in such a position of power that is for or against some policy or idea, we wonder, well, what is it that motivates them to take that position? Is it the good nature and empathy and humanitarian drive of tech billionaires that has made some of the notable ones say they support universal basic income? Or is there more to it? We recently interviewed Andrew Yang, who's running as a Democrat for president in 2020. He's running primarily on universal basic income. And we had a very good conversation with him about UBI. And he didn't seem particularly concerned that rich tech guys, mostly, as they are effectively, are in favor of universal basic income, or at least didn't seem to think that there were any self-serving reasons for that. And I've sort of floated the idea that if you are Jeff Bezos at Amazon or you are Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, just to take two specific examples, and you imagine everybody in the country getting an extra $10,000, right? Some kind of UBI of about $800 a month or $10,000 a year. People without that much extra money who get an extra 10 grand a year are very likely to spend that additional money on stuff like the products maybe sold on Amazon, or maybe stuff like the products advertised on Facebook. So that's a possible motivation for some of these tech billionaires to say, I would love to give people another $10,000 to have, which will become mostly spent money on products, because these are not people likely to be saving a lot of that money. So let's put that aside for a second, but let's remember it. Let's now talk about a related topic, activism. We spoke last week, maybe the week before, about sort of the concept of approved and acceptable activism, and it was related to the heckling of politicians and the concept of sanctioned and comfortable activism. And as I've said before, if you were only going to be activists using the tactics that those in power say are okay, you're unlikely to ever really get anything done. So the similarity here would be tech billionaires and politicians who say, we want change, we want to improve the world, etc., except only within the confines that they have established and are comfortable with. That's the one important element that underlies both how tech billionaires want to change and improve the world and how politicians want to encourage and support activism. So let me give you an example. When tech billionaires encourage and approve of universal basic income, they support changing the world via universal basic income in a very specific way that's not going to disrupt the broader status quo, and it's going to keep the infrastructure basically the same. And this is outlined in a really good article in the New York Times by Anand Giridharadas, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, called Beware Rich People Who Say They Want to Change the World. What he outlines is that giving $10,000 to everybody in the United States through universal basic income changes nothing about corporations being able to use loopholes to pay no taxes. It changes nothing about the corporate lobbying industrial complex that allows corporations to have broad control over our political system. It doesn't do anything about eliminating the carried interest loophole, which is a great tool for them to use to pay very, very little money. It's not fake change. Like, universal basic income is a real change, and the $10,000 a year would be really great to a lot of people. But it is safe change that maintains the status quo and doesn't endanger the infrastructure that the corporate tech billionaire elites have built to benefit them.
Right, because in most UBI plans now, that money is coming from money that we're currently spending on social welfare programs. So things like food stamps and
Sure.
Medicaid, instead of spending in that category where there's a lot of bureaucracy, we'll just give the money directly to the people. Now, you could fund UBI by raising taxes on the rich,
You
but
could.
that's not so politically savvy, and that's why we don't see too many of those plans out there.
Sure, but I think if you're a tech billionaire, you would probably be willing to, even if it did require paying a little higher tax, that's a pretty fair trade for maintaining the exact status quo system that has allowed you to become a billionaire to begin with, right? So now let's talk about the political side. Politicians say, let's raise the minimum wage to $15 or $20, or let's lower it to $10, or let's argue about the effect of a higher minimum wage on fast food workers. But basically what they're all saying is, let's keep the system the same and argue about the details, which are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or $15 minimum wage. Business charity, okay? Business charity is another one where you see activism via donations cheered, but it's actually not going to change the big picture of how the elites and billionaires and corporations control government and control politicians. So this is why I am more steadfast than ever that we need to decide the type of change that we want. We need to decide which protest methods are appropriate and when, right? Now, I'm not saying heckling Sarah Huckabee Sanders at a chicken joint changes the status quo. That's not what I'm saying. It's not about the heckling of Trump officials specifically. But the point is, anytime you let them set the rules, it means the game will never change. You will be arguing about exactly where the strike zone is, rather than actually changing the game that's being played, to use a sort of sports analogy. And right now, really, if you want change, you have to disrupt the status quo. That is where this sort of fundamental discomfort or skepticism comes from when you hear me say, I support UBI, Universal Basic Income, but we need to understand why it seems to be so appealing to so many tech billionaires. It doesn't mean that they're bad people, but we need to understand that a lot of these movements, I don't like to use the term controlled opposition, but it is an arbitrarily narrowed scope of activism. UBI, negative income tax, for example, as a discussion, neither changes the system that has allowed corporations to completely subjugate and take over control of our political system. That, I think, is the key point to keep in mind here. Hey, we've been talking for a while now about the problems that Fox News has been having in terms of their advertisers, and we now have learned that Fox News' head of ad sales, Marianne Gambelli, is admitting that advertisers are leaving Fox News, and it is hurting them, although she is spinning it in an interesting way, which we'll get to. So there's this kind of rule in advertising and the media world, which is you do need an audience in order to generate ad revenue from that audience, but merely having the audience doesn't guarantee that that audience is going to be profitable for you. So an example would be, you could have a huge audience, but of people who have no money, right? So they're not attractive to advertisers. The big audience is not necessarily monetizable. In Fox News's case, they've got a big audience. Some of the most watched programs on the 24-hour cable news stations are on Fox News, but advertising on Fox News can hurt businesses rather than help them because of the negative press that it can generate. We previously talked about what went on with Laura Ingram's program. Laura Ingram went on this just horrible white sort of ethno-nationalist rant recently related to immigrants, but before that, she slammed teenage activist David Hogg, I guess because he didn't get into some schools.
He didn't get to Stanford or something. Maybe his grades weren't good enough, or his SAT scores.
She made fun of him on air, and very quickly, an activism campaign online targeted with shame some of her advertisers, and the number of advertisers on Laura Ingram's program dropped from over 200 to under 100. A lot of the ones that are left are those direct response ads, like call 800, 999, 8888 to order this body pillow made from shark skin or whatever. It's those types of ads which typically pay less. They're not exactly what you would consider the most prestigious ads to be running on your channel. But it's not just Laura Ingram. The Hannity program is also in trouble. Dozens of advertisers have bailed from advertising with Sean Hannity. So the ad boycotts work. The head of ad sales at Fox News is blaming not the content, which is what has offended people to the point that advertisers have said we're better off not advertising here. Marianne Gambelli is saying that media matters and activists are to blame for the fact that they are hurting when it comes to ad sales. Of course, this is very silly because if you don't have content that would be concerning to advertisers, the ad boycotts wouldn't work, right? We have had people that try to get advertisers to boycott our program, and they will contact the advertisers, and the advertisers will typically reach out to us and say, you know, we're not concerned about running ads on your show. These people are saying they won't buy from us if we advertise on your show, but just so you know, we're not worried about it because they are small in number, and you are bringing us more business than we risk losing because of the association with your show. It's a free market calculation, right? People use the First Amendment to say what they want, and they can reach out to advertisers and say, I don't like your association with this show, so I'm not going to buy from you if you continue advertising there. The advertiser also has total discretion in terms of where they want to advertise. They will evaluate, will running an ad with Hannity bring us money, or will it cost us money because of the negative press that it might generate? If placement on Fox News will hurt their brand, they can decide for themselves what to do. Tucker Carlson promoting the idea that diversity worsens the United States, that leads to people making decisions, and it can lead to viewers contacting advertisers. It can lead to advertisers saying, we don't want to be associated with that. In a normal free market, Fox News would adjust their content and their business model, and they would say, wait a second, the stuff we're publishing is hurting us, so we're going to modify what it is that we're putting out there. They're not doing that, which is actually pretty interesting because maybe they don't need to be profitable. We know that networks like RT, Russian television, and Al Jazeera, they don't even have advertising, right? They don't need to be profitable because they are funded by state governments and they are there to espouse a particular point of view. I thought Fox News did need to be profitable, but maybe they don't. Like maybe they have sort of a similar group of funders that keeps them afloat regardless of how much ad revenue they make.
Yeah, exactly. I think they have backup plans. Like if all the prestigious advertisers pull out, then they could go to maybe those supplement scam sales people, or
Yes.
they could go to, you know, bonus buckets. But even if that doesn't work, then they're still going to have rich donor buddies who fund their channel because it's a good investment for them.
That may well be the case because it's a political investment for many of them. Funny side note, by the way, the head of ad sales from Fox News, Marianne Gambelli, she said to Politico, we're not concerned with the state of advertising because fewer ads means people don't change channels. This is so dumb. Like what they're kind of saying is a lot of people switch to like a different news channel as soon as Fox News goes to a break. So if we have fewer ads, people won't switch away as much, so we'll have higher ratings. That would only apply if you were skipping commercial breaks altogether, because if you go to a commercial break and there's one ad or 5 ads, people who flip when you go to commercial flip right when the first commercial comes on. Like it's a pretty dumb idea that they're going to watch more because you have fewer ads. If you have 3 ad breaks an hour or 4 ad breaks an hour, as soon as you go to commercial, people flip.
Don't most of those channels play their ads at around the same time? So even if you do flip to another channel, that other channel is also playing an ad?
I've suspected that, but I've not cared enough to actually time it. But a lot of people report to me that they're sort of going to break at the same time in order to negate the benefit of switching to another channel. By the way, what a coincidence that advertisers leave and all of a sudden Fox News says it's good for them to have fewer advertisers. My plan is continue shaming advertisers on Twitter and social media because it is effective and it actually can adjust the media landscape, which is what we're trying to do. Send me your thoughts if you're against the shaming of advertisers. I know there are people in the audience who are, and they agree more with Destiny, Stephen Bennell, his position saying that, well, I won't make his argument for him, but it was a sort of free speech related argument. I want to hear from you if you're against the tactic of shaming advertisers online. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a big and sincere thank you to Steve Hagerman. Steve Hagerman is today's new member of the day. Also want to say thanks to somebody who's been supporting us through membership for years, Linda Ines. Linda Ines has been with us, or Innes, I wonder if how it's pronounced, like McInnes, Innes?
Right. Yeah, I didn't want to make that comparison.
Reference, yeah, I apologize. Linda's been with us since 2013. Steve and Linda, thank you. Join them at www.joinpacman.com. Why become a member? Because it's great, and because you get the bonus show and commercial-free audio and video streams of the show. We've been talking about the projection that we hear from the right about political violence. We're going to speak to David Neiwert on today's program about this issue of right-wing violence, among other things. But despite the right's claim that most political violence is on the left, the reality is that most political violence in the United States comes from the right against the left. And case in point, yesterday, George Soros, the billionaire philanthropist and sort of like favorite punching bag target of the right, responsible for absolute and utter evil, if you ask them, behind every conspiracy theory almost that they come up with, an explosive device was found in his mailbox. It wasn't just something that looked like an explosive. It was actually an explosive device that was proactively detonated by a bomb squad, that was called. Police responded yesterday at 3:45 to his house. An employee had opened the mailbox, saw what looked like an explosive device. Soros wasn't even home. And this guy is sort of the darling target. Anti-Semites target George Soros because he's Jewish. Anti-liberals target George Soros because he uses his money to push leftist causes. Anti-anyone who backed Obama types attack George Soros because he's a rich guy who backed Obama. And extremists who use the threat of violence based on political beliefs, we typically call that terrorism, right? But typically you see hesitation to apply that term to incidents like this. And if you look at some of the enclaves on the internet where this issue is being discussed, they are celebrating it in all of the usual places on the internet. And then they are also moving to false flag conspiracies. George Soros had the device planted himself in order to make the right look bad, which is, of course, so stupid. Because you don't need false flags to make it seem as though the right are the purveyors of the overwhelming majority of political violence in the United States. Anecdotally, we've recently talked about Heather Heyer, who was run over and killed at that alt-right white supremacist march in Charlottesville. We've talked about numerous mass shootings with assault rifles by individuals motivated by right-wing ideology. We've talked about the cheering of body-slamming reporters by Republicans when they ask questions you don't like. That was the president of the United States cheerleading that, by the way. We've seen indifference to the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But when the left interrupts Stephen Miller's sushi night or Sarah Huckabee Sanders' chicken meal at the Red Hen in West Virginia or Virginia, wherever it was, that's uncivil, Pat, and that's over the line. And if you kneel during the national anthem, it's also disrespectful. Tucker Carlson can't go to restaurants anymore. The right has almost a near monopoly on actual political violence. And it's really important, number one, don't be sucked into this false debate about where is it okay to protest. Is it okay to protest at sushi restaurants, or can you only protest political people doing horrible things at Indian restaurants? Don't fall for that false debate, and don't fall for the projection that the political violence comes from the left. I saw an Antifa video of somebody throwing a bike lock. Okay, well, left-wing terrorism was more prevalent in the 1960s. You had eco-terrorism. You had some animal rights extremism, mostly property damage, generally didn't target people. But we've had now more than 30 years of predominantly right-wing violence against actual people. Go back to the 1984 murder of Alan Berg, the liberal radio host. Look at domestic extremist murders in the United States. 74% are done by right-wingers. That doesn't even include those by ultra-conservative Islamic extremists. I argue it should. Any kind of violence motivated by religious fundamentalism of that kind, whether it's Muslim or Christian or Jew or whoever, it is right-wing by its very nature. We're not even including that, Pat. And 74% of political murders in the U.S. are done by the right.
Yeah, and I will say that liberals are doing a poor job at showing that violence on the right is much more prominent than violence by the left. And maybe that has to do with the fact that Republicans are in power now. So there's a lot of other things to go after. Like liberals will criticize, say, like the travel ban, or family separations, or Trump trying to gut the Affordable Care Act. So there's a lot of content there. There's a lot of more tangible things that liberals can go after.
I agree that that's true, but it's not like the left was successful at making it very clear that the majority of the political violence was on the right when Barack Obama was president.
Sure.
So I don't know that that's fully responsible for it. But still, the right will continue to say, no matter who's president, that it's liberals and Democrats who do the violence. And of course, they have no data to back that up whatsoever. The reason it matters is that you can't solve the problem if you allow them to misstate reality. And if you slice it any way that you want, the reality is that the overwhelming majority of political violence, extremist domestic political violence, is coming from the right, sometimes against moderates who aren't right enough, but overwhelmingly against people on the left, and we are going to continue talking about it. Hey, there are sometimes important political policy disagreements that we have to talk about. Like, I might disagree with Donald Trump's policy on trade to the extent that he understands it. But sometimes we just have to call out bad people and people who are just lying. And there's been this backstory of criticism from Donald Trump of President Barack Obama, who criticized him for years about the amount of golfing that he did, which, quite frankly, it was relatively infrequent, particularly compared to the amount that Donald Trump has been golfing. Another narrative that Donald Trump has tried to push is that he is just the biggest supporter of the troops, the biggest supporter of the military. And it's recently been pointed out that Donald Trump has not once gone and actually visited our troops overseas. This is something that Barack Obama did many times. This is something that George W. Bush did many times. And most people, even if they disagree with specific deployments that members of the military are sent to, would agree that when you have a volunteer army as the reason why we don't need a draft, it makes sense for presidents who are deciding where our troops are deployed to go and visit them. It's not necessarily a political statement about what the troops are doing, simply to say the president decides where they go. The president should go and visit some of the troops every once in a while. And during an Associated Press interview last week, it was pointed out to Donald Trump that, hey, you haven't gone and visited the troops at all. Donald Trump said that he is very busy with everything that's taking place here to go and visit the troops. Donald Trump has golfed almost 70 times with over 150 days of visits to golf clubs. Obama visited troops within 3 months of taking office. I'm not talking about turning the visiting of troops into some kind of penis-sized contest. It's about a truly disingenuous person in Donald Trump, who said during this interview with the AP, quote, "Well, I will do that at some point, but I don't think it's overly necessary. I've been very busy with everything that's taking place here. We have the greatest economy in the history of our country." I mean, this is the greatest economy we've ever had, best unemployment numbers. Many groups are, we've never even been close to those numbers. I'm doing a lot of things, but it's something I do and do gladly. He also added later in the interview that no one has been better at the military than him. I don't know what that means. So there's a couple theories here. Number one, he's scared. Like, he's just genuinely scared to go and visit troops where they are stationed around the world. That's one possibility. Second possibility is he knows that the troops are increasingly not a friendly group to him. His approval among members of the military is down to 44%, according to a Military Times poll, down from around 50%. This is very low for a Republican president. And there's a really interesting element to that poll, which looks at approval by branch. And if you know anything about military branches, you won't be surprised that it's the Marine Corps that has the highest very favorable rating for Donald Trump. And in total, between very favorable and favorable, something like 64.5% or so, 65.5% of the Marine Corps has a favorable view of Trump. Navy and Air Force have the least favorable view of Trump. Obviously, those beta Navy and Air Force people don't like Trump. They're losers. And the Army's kind of in the middle. Kneeling during the national anthem, we're supposed to believe, is disrespectful to the troops. But being the president and being too busy playing golf to visit the troops is not something that we should be horrified by?
Personally, I think it's a mix of him being too afraid to go to war zones. He did, after all, dodge the draft 5 times, and him just not liking to travel too much. But also, the point that he brought up about the economy being so good that he doesn't have to go visit the troops overseas.
How is it related?
That doesn't hold up, right? Even if that's true, wouldn't you want them to share in the glory and, you know, to give one of your campaign-style rally speeches in front of them?
You're right, but he might as well have brought up Hillary's emails. I mean, it doesn't matter that it's completely unrelated and a non sequitur. Absolutely disgusting. And what really, you know, we've talked about how the farmers that overwhelmingly supported Trump from the Midwest in the election, they're getting crushed by Trump's tariffs right now. Will they hold Trump and the Republican policies that are hurting them accountable in the midterm elections in just a couple of weeks? I don't know if they will. The military, disgraced time and again. If I were in the military and I saw that Trump claims he's too busy to come visit me, but he's playing golf every week, seemingly, if I see that he is ridiculing the parents of a deceased fellow service member, as he did multiple times, including with the family of Captain Khizr Khan, I would say, no, this is not a guy who is looking out for the troops. This is a guy who is actively hostile and indifferent to the plight and the day-to-day of what it means to be in the military of the United States. Will they hold him accountable at the ballot box in November? I hope so. I don't want to make any assumption right now. I hope that they will. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram, at David Pakman Show, behind-the-scenes pictures there from my weekend at Politicon in Los Angeles. And make sure you follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by David Neiwert, who's a freelance journalist, blogger, author of a number of books, most recently Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. David, thanks for joining me. This topic is so important. We've been talking about political violence. We've been talking about the rise of the alt-right. Maybe to start with, we could talk a little bit about the sort of genesis of this modern alt-right, radical pro-Trump element of the American right. What's the sort of genesis of it? What groups maybe coalesced in order to create the group that exists today? Or what do you see as the origins of it?
Well, as I explain in the book, I trace the origins back to the 1990s and the rise of the Patriot militia movement. Because that was where we really first started seeing this culture built around conspiracy theories and basically, alternative facts. And that was where I first really observed this epistemological bubble that they create for themselves. It's kind of an alternative universe built out of these conspiracy theories and alternative facts. That actually functions as a place where these folks epistemologically dwell, and it's really difficult to get people out of this bubble once they are in it, and it has a really powerfully unhinging effect.
Can you talk about what the common, I hesitate to call them issues or policy positions that this radical pro-Trump right has, because that almost gives them sort of too much credibility. But can you at least talk about some of the ideological themes that seem to unite the individuals that are part of that movement?
Well, I think the overarching theme, and it's one that's been around, like I say, since the 90s, is that there is a massive conspiracy of globalists or communists or what have you, to enslave mankind and destroy Western civilization. And This is actually part of, I think, Donald Trump's worldview, too. He clearly believes that there is a culture war going on between white people and non-whites and liberals. And he sees himself as a culture warrior on behalf of his white working class base. And that's why he behaves the way he does.
Does Donald Trump actually appeal to the majority or a significant portion of this new modern radical alt-right, or has he just kind of become a convenient vessel through which they maybe see an opportunity to inch closer to the America they'd like to see?
I think it's both. It's kind of a symbiotic relationship. He definitely does things that signal to them that he's on their side, including such things as, pardoning the folks behind the Bundy standoff, and doing all these various sorts of moves that actually help very clearly are sort of signals to this radical base that he's on their side. And they uniformly interpret the signals as, see, Donald Trump's really on our side. And of course, after things like Charlottesville, when Trump said, some of these folks out here are very fine people, there was quite a bit of uproar about that. And you recall that he at one point said, well, no, I denounce all white supremacists. And then the next day said some of them are very fine people. They uniformly ignore the disavowals, because what happens is they say, well, oh, he's just doing this to sort of maintain his political viability. He's just being practical. We know what he's going to do, but we understand, he really is on our side. And the main thing that they see him doing is creating a lot of chaos and basically destroying the existing system, which is really what they want him to do.
I've actually spoken to David when I interviewed Richard Spencer, the well-known alt-right white nationalist. I sort of talked to him about this reality that on the one hand, Donald Trump has appealed to people like him, but at the same time, he does have a daughter who converted to Judaism, and one of the most powerful people, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, also is Jewish, and pointed out some of these other data points. And what Spencer basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, is, listen, this is as publicly as you're going to get a president signaling that he's on our side. So we just are going to ignore that stuff. Yes, he's got a converted to Jewish daughter, and he claims he disavows white supremacy, and he says he didn't know who David Duke was, and then when he found out, he said he disavowed him or whatever. But we understand that this is as much as a president really can do, and we recognize that.
Yeah, and yet even yesterday, Donald Trump declared that I am a nationalist. You don't get many more powerful signals to this base than that, because of course they see themselves as white nationalists, but they're perfectly happy having him declare as a nationalist, because that's really what they're about anyway.
In retrospect, did the entire questioning of President Obama's birthplace and birth certificate, did that now, we can tell, serve as a pretty good precursor to the movement that has been built around Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of silly, because at the time, I think most of us dismissed this as, oh, this is just kookery and nobody really believes it. Yet if you poll, I think Republicans now, something like 70% of them believe it to this day, that Barack Obama was not legitimately born in the United States. And it's a very good proxy for people's gullibility and willingness to absorb these fake facts and alternative theory, these conspiracy theories. And obviously, that was something that Donald Trump picked up on very early. It was basically the foundation of his political career, was his, pushing the birther conspiracy theory back in 2011.
Do you think that, so we've talked a lot here on the program about how by any objective measure, The overwhelming majority of political violence in the United States is being done by the right. 74% of murders for political reasons are done by right-wing extremists. That's not even counting extremist Islamic ideology, which I consider to be also far-right. It's just a different flavor of that. But even without counting that, we're talking about 74%. The right likes to frame, you know, Antifa people threw a bike lock at somebody or broke a piece of glass, but the statistics don't bear out that it's the left. Can you talk a little bit about whether there is more of a tendency to violence now than before Trump, whether we're seeing an actual emboldening that can be seen in statistics in any way, or is it just getting more coverage now?
No, I think it's actually happening more. You know, in the first month after Trump's election, we had over 1,000 hate incidents in this country, which is an unbelievable escalation of the rate of hate incidents. SPLC maintained a database on this, and I went through that database and figured out that nearly about 48% of all of those incidents, those 1,000 or so incidents that happened in that first month, 48% of them featured people either using Trump's name, like chanting Trump, 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 to intimidate and threaten minorities, or using his rhetoric, such as, you know, make America great again, or what have you, or build the wall, or in some cases just saying Trump is going to get rid of you people. Nearly half of those incidents featured that kind of rhetoric, which tells you a lot. And I think the main thing it tells you is that Donald Trump's election essentially gave permission for people who have been holding back on their innate racism for many, many years to express it as openly as they can. And, you know, we're seeing all these viral videos that are coming out of white people being ugly racist to somebody. You know, obviously that kind of stuff happened before, and obviously the fact that we're seeing these now has a lot to do with the fact that everybody has a cell phone. But it also has a great deal to do with the fact that since the election, racists and haters have definitely believed that Trump's election more or less gave them permission to be as ugly as they want to be.
Yeah, what do you mentioned viral videos. What's your understanding of this alt-right's use of memes and internet humor? I mean, it does seem to be effective at sort of inserting ideas into culture, including without everybody necessarily understanding the source or background, because you can put a funny meme out there that is just funny and it sort of gets, it obtains cachet, and people don't necessarily know the xenophobic or racist origins of it.
Yeah, well, that's what they really believe, is that their meme magic is spreading their message. And, you know, to some extent it's true. I mean, this is not your grandfather's Klan. They are not the backward-looking hate groups that we've been dealing with for many years. The alt-right is very much a forward-looking, very savvy in terms of culture, pop culture, very savvy in terms of leveraging social media to get what they want. And this is one of the frightening things about them, is that they basically are able to reach this whole new audience that they were never able to reach before, when they were just, you know, organizing cross burnings down in the South. They're able to basically recruit a whole generation of mostly young white males between the ages of 15 and 30. That's their demographic, and that's who they aim for.
David, in the brief time we have left, what happens to the alt-right after Trump? The Tea Party, which did very well in the 2010 midterms, eventually, as many people predicted, just kind of half petered out and half became integrated into the mainstream Republican Party, slightly modifying the sort of average view of Republicans. What do you see as the future of the alt-right movement beyond Trump?
Well, I say that I've been saying quite regularly, in fact, even before I wrote this book, that if Trump disappears tomorrow, we're going to have this problem for another 10 years, because Trump represents this very big shift in culture, in American political culture, and that isn't going to go away overnight. And a lot of this has to do with the way that the Republican Party has admitted these levels of extremism to right within its ranks, and obviously Donald Trump's the sort of apotheosis of that. So even if Trump disappears tomorrow, there's going to be Trumpists all throughout the Republican Party, and they're not going to be able to get rid of them very easily. In fact, I think that the Republican Party is basically now doomed to be the party of Trump. I don't know how well they'll do electorally. I actually believe that the vast majority of Americans are still not hateful like this. I think Trump's election was a fluke, and hopefully, we'll get this ship turned around. But it's going to be a long, slow haul. And anybody that thinks that just impeaching Trump is going to solve the problem is deluding themselves. This is going to be with us for a very long time.
Yes, the impeachment as not a solution to the broader problem is something I've been talking about as well. The book is called Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. Highly recommend it. We've been speaking with the book's author, David Neiwert. David, thank you so much for talking to us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dave.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It wouldn't be completely unprecedented to hear that you can effectively buy ambassadorships in American politics. And we heard from Donald Trump during his campaign that he was going to stop the lobbyist status quo, that he was going to end the revolving door of influence peddlers, that he was going to drain the swamp. We heard all of that stuff, but it turns out that it's not actually happening. That won't come as a surprise to many people in our audience. And we now have learned about a new ambassador, an ambassador to South Africa, who it has not been officially announced yet, but we've learned that it is going to be Lana Marks. Lana Marks has no diplomatic experience. She works making $100,000 luxury handbags. She's lied about her past accomplishments. Like, for example, she claimed to have played in the French Open. She didn't. It's unclear if she played in the 1985 Maccabee Games, as she claimed. She's accused of not paying her lawyers and accountants and landlords and employees, which actually sounds a lot like what Donald Trump does as well. And she just so happens, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, she just so happens to be a member at Donald Trump's own Mar-a-Lago golf club and resort in Florida. Now, she is from South Africa, so that's something, I guess, that has some connection to the place she is going to be nominated to be ambassador for. Many presidents do versions of this, okay? So I'm not pretending for a second that it's just Trump that does this. Obama did it. But the difference is when Obama did it with people far more qualified, the right said it's favoritism. This is disgusting. This should be illegal if it's not, which of course it's not. And President Obama should be removed because it is clear evidence that his loyalties lie somewhere other than the United States. Trump does it, and you have the usual enclaves of the internet defending the decision with comments like, hey, guys, she could be really qualified. Is the left opposing the nomination merely because she's a woman? Because that would be wrong, as if all of a sudden their concern trolling about misogyny from the left about Trump's unqualified ambassador pick is actually really the political issue at hand. This is disgusting. It's not unique to Trump, but he did tell us he was going to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that she does South Africa relations as well as she does her handbags, because those handbags do look pretty nice.
Yeah.
You'd just think that in a country full of 320 million people, we'd be able to find better candidates out there. Like, there are only 200 countries for which you have to send ambassadors.
And we don't even have ambassadors at all of them.
Yeah,
it's hard to imagine that this is the right person. And an underreported issue, by the way, it's related, and it's a good opportunity to bring it up. I was reading about it yesterday. The Department of Veterans Affairs Secretary, Robert Wilkie, is refusing to share documents linking agency officials to Mar-a-Lago. Very specifically, so there's cronyism in general, but then there's like really noticeable and pathetic cronyism and not literally nepotism, but sort of similar, not Trump's family, but some next layer removed of officials at the agency connected to Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago, and Wilkie is refusing to hand information over to Congress. Now, at this point, would it matter? Of course not. I mean, yes, Trump said drain the swamp, and he's not doing it, but his followers don't care. And yes, it's cronyism, but do you really think that if a list was released of people at the Department of Veterans Affairs connected to Mar-a-Lago, that anybody is going to hold Donald Trump accountable? It wouldn't even be the biggest scandal on any specific day that it comes out. And it's abundantly clear that there's just no appetite to hold the guy accountable to this. But in the meantime, Lana Marks, can somebody just tell me, other than being born in South Africa, which I don't even know that it counts as a qualification, what makes her qualified to be ambassador to South Africa? Like, make the case for her qualification. I want to hear from somebody about it.
We'll have to see that during her confirmation hearings. I mean, I'd like to hear her talk about the biggest cash crops in South Africa and their biggest exports, because I want to see her go into detail on all this stuff.
I would love to hear from her about that and all other important issues to South Africa. We've been talking about, in the era of Trump, how do we teach our daughters or our sons to be decent and respectful people when the president of the United States isn't? And this includes making fun of a disabled reporter. This includes attacking and ridiculing the parents of deceased military service members. And it also includes the grab 'em by the pussy Access Hollywood tapes, where Donald Trump said, when you're rich and famous or rich, I don't remember exactly which one it was, they just let you grab them by the pussy. You just do whatever you want. I kiss them when I want to, blah, blah, blah.
Don't even wait.
That's exactly right. Don't even have to wait. There is now a man who has been accused of groping a woman on a flight from Texas to New Mexico on Southwest Airlines, who is saying that he did it because the president said that it's okay. A woman fell asleep on a Southwest Airlines flight, woke up to a man in the row behind her, lifting her sweater and touching the skin around her bra line. Even the description of this is extraordinarily creepy. She assumed it was an accident, which already is extraordinarily charitable. I think if I saw that happening, I don't know that I go to. It was probably an accident that someone has reached their arm around, lifted my sweater up, and is touching me near my bra. I wouldn't assume that that's an accident, but the woman did. But then 30 minutes later, the exact same guy grabs her right side around her ribs and her bra line. She confronted the man named Bruce Michael Alexander, asked why he thought it was okay to do that, and demanded that he stop. She asked to be moved to a different seat on the Southwest Airlines, Southwest Airlines flight. And then the guy was arrested when the airplane landed. Later, in the police vehicle, Alexander told officers that, hey, the president of the United States says, quote, it's okay to grab women by their private parts, and therefore, why is it wrong for him to do it? So the immediate defense is this guy was obviously being satirical. But does it even matter, Pat? Like, if you're seriously defending groping based on the president saying that it's okay to do it, that's horrible. If you're satirically doing it, it doesn't excuse anything, but it points to the sort of doubt of cover that Donald Trump creates when he says things like, you don't even have to wait, you just do it. It's not even the first time that this has happened. There have actually been a couple of incidents where this happened. Back in July, a student said, grab her by the pussy, before allegedly raping an undergraduate student. And then you also had a Connecticut politician who groped a female colleague's genitals in November of 2017, saying, quote, that he loves this new world because he no longer has to be politically correct.
Yeah, it's the dumbest excuse I've ever heard. It's like saying Becky gets to stay up until midnight, so I too want to stay up until midnight. No, it's wrong when Trump does it, and it's wrong when these other people do it too.
It's also interesting that he maligned so this Connecticut guy focused on the politically correct element of it. The right has maligned so-called political correctness to such a degree that they now conflate it with not assaulting people. Like, oh, the politically correct police say I can't assault people. Well, I'm glad that now Trump is president. Political correctness has nothing to do with sexual assault, and the idea that they're conflating it in that way is also part of the problem. Now, in Trump's defense, this is not really a defense of Trump, just as a disclaimer. In Trump's defense, he did say, When you're famous, they let you do it. This guy wasn't famous. He's just some dude on a Southwest Airlines flight, so he didn't really understand what Trump was saying.
They forgot those first couple of steps. That's important. Yes. That's crucial to this whole thing.
The president also said that it's okay to body slam reporters if they are political opponents or perceived political opponents. These things have an effect, and I don't want to hear from anybody who's just going to write in and say, David, this was merely satire. It doesn't matter. And Trump saying he liked it when Greg Gianforte body slammed that reporter. It was merely, it's all satire, because these things are having real world impacts, right? When Donald Trump cheerleads Greg Gianforte body slamming a journalist and then simultaneously is playing coy and providing cover for Saudi Arabia after they actually murdered and dismembered a Washington Post journalist at their embassy in Istanbul, Turkey, you can no longer separate the analysis of whether it's satirical with the fact that it has a real world impact. So if you're just save your breath, if you're going to leave a voicemail, save your finger strength if you're going to write me an email or tweet me. If your defense is it's satirical and it warrants no analysis, you are wrong, and I will immediately just delete your email and delete your voicemail because it's just a bogus explanation. We have a voicemail number, 2192-DAVID-P. Here is an interesting take on, we're almost at the midterm elections. We have early voting already taking place, and that's sort of what this voicemail relates to.
Hi, David. My name is Eli. I'm from Massachusetts, and I think part of the problem in modern-day politics is that a lot of progressives or a lot of people that have progressive values aren't running in races that, in districts that maybe we could win in different places. And I think it's really important, just as important as it is to get people to vote, it's important to get people to run. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on running for election, not just personally, but, in general, in terms of the general public. And have you ever considered running for election, and would you ever consider running for election for any office? Anyway, thank you for the show.
Well, because I was born in Argentina, I can never be president. So that's one position I would never think of running for, because as of right now, the law would not allow me to be president.
Kind of an open question, though. Ted Cruz would say otherwise, for example.
Yes. Hey, listen, if Ted Cruz can be president, can't I be president? No. But I haven't really thought about running for elected office. Years ago, I think I was must have been 22. So that was in the 1950s. I was thinking about running for city councilor of Northampton, Massachusetts, and I met with one of the outgoing city councilors, and we talked about it, and it immediately became clear I had no interest in doing it. It's somewhere between 30 and 40 hours a week of work, but it pays $5,000 a year. So you need, maybe it pays a little more now. At the time, it paid $5,000 a year. So you still need some other job, and you deal with a lot of BS. And peace and love. I know a lot of the Northampton city councilors. Peace and love to everybody who does it. But that was not the right position for me. But I would consider maybe in the future running for something, but right now it's not an interest of mine.
Yeah, and I would maybe consider voting for you. I would have to hear what your policy proposals are and what your takes are on all the different political issues of the day, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
But the other question is, what about more progressives actually running? This is a major issue, which is that the left needs to develop a serious farm league, for lack of a better term, of good progressives that know how to present their ideas in front of cameras and in front of audiences. And we do need more real progressives running. Of course, thinking about where can they actually win. You don't want to just have the further left candidates in places where that's just going to lead to a Republican winning. But we need more real progressives running. We need more progressives that are equipped to run. And all of the above ideas that were presented there, I'm basically behind, including going out and voting right now, because early voting is happening. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Become a member or a patron to get instant access. Really good Pat story coming up on the bonus show. I haven't even heard the story, but it seems like it's a good one.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.